Jim came to me and he said, would you be interested in talking about your leadership experiences? And he said, we would be pleased if you could distill down your now 40-year career into 30 minutes of lessons. And I was thrilled at the thought of it, and then saddened, of course, to think that I could actually take 40 years and compress it into 30. And I did it last night, and I had 8 minutes left after I took all of the important stuff and put it together. Well, my hope today, since we all tend to be leaders in one aspect of our lives or another, that I might be able to simply leave some breadcrumbs along the trail. Trails that I have followed through my career and say, here's the signposts I saw, here's why I went down that path, and perhaps one or two of these may be something that you may be interested in trying to pursue for yourselves. So, I picked out finally, when I got done, 8 things from a philosophical or a tactical perspective that I have found important in these 40 years that I've spent between all in manufacturing technology. The first, in 1991, I was flipping through the Harvard Business Review, and there was an excerpt in there from a book. And I read it and I went, wow, this is pretty great. And the book was called Good to Great. And if you've never had a chance to read it, you may want to pick up a copy. I have bought dozens of these books, and I've given them to dozens of people that I thought perhaps they would be helpful for. It is clearly, from my perspective, the best business book I've ever read. I have my dog-eared, annotated copy on my desk at all times. If I got rid of every other book in my life, I would keep this one. Jim Collins in 2001, and what Mr. Collins did back then was he tried to look at, using paired comparisons, companies that were in a similar set of circumstances, where one company soared and became great, and another company didn't. And he looked for the differentiating factors that led to one company's success versus another company's success. And he identified many of them, and the one that particularly struck me was his section on leadership, what Jim Collins calls level 5 leadership. So this was now many years ago, 25, 30 years ago, and I was aspiring to greatness. I wanted great things for the people I worked with. I wanted a company that had great results. And so I read this book with deep interest. Two phrases from the book that I saw in the excerpt that really caught my eye. One, good is the enemy of great. One reason that we have so little that is great is because we have so many things that are good. Wow. We don't have great schools principally because we have good schools. We don't have great government principally because we have good government. Many of us settle for good lives instead of striving for great lives. So these phrases caught my eye. And again, I read the book and I have a clear understanding of everything he said in this book. Well, what he said about leadership, there's a section in there called Level 5 Leadership. He said that every leader of the companies that became great that he knew of shared one set of common characteristics. They combined a tremendously tenacious professional will to succeed with amazing and enduring personal humility. So, think about the leaders in your life and ask yourself, how many people are able to maintain that balance between fierce professional will and true personal humility? Modest and willful, humble and fearless. And the analogy he used was, great leaders have windows and they have mirrors. When there's blame to be apportioned, they look in the mirror. When there's credit to be given, they look through a window. Wow, really powerful. So, thing one I've aspired to for many, many years, practice level 5 leadership. Aspect 2, management is easy. And actually, I believe this. Management is easy. This is sort of a universal theme for anybody who has to lead in almost any situation. because we're all confronted with one simple reality. We are constantly wrestling with the notion that we have scarce resources and we have to fulfill unlimited demands with those resources. If you talk to somebody who's got a department of 3 people, they're going to say, I got too much to do and I don't have enough people. I talked to a guy who's running a division where he's got 83,000 people working for him and billions of dollars of budget, and you know what he tells me? I got too much to do and not enough resources. It is simply a reality of our lives. We can't moan about it, because the fact of the matter is that management is actually not about trying to finish everything on the list and get everything done. Management is fundamentally about prioritization. And when I came to really understand that every situation I was managing in, we were going to deal with scarce resources and unlimited demands, my job was to prioritize. And I've learned over time, great leaders pick the right priorities. People who are not as successful as leaders pick the wrong priorities. That really applies on almost every level, whether you're managing a department, a company, a family, a fire department, whatever you're working with. Management's easy. The allocation of scarce resources to unlimited demands. Affiliated idea is the cycle of work. So if we start at the beginning, if we have a clear sense of prioritization, what comes next? Well, to me, it's almost an endless looping cycle. We prioritize, we set goals, we measure, and really measure, we collect feedback, and then we correct. And the next thing we do, we start the cycle all over again. We reprioritize, we set new sets of goals. At one point, somebody said, can you describe your management style? And I was running a company that had 3,000 people in 8 plants across the world. And I said, well, I think my management style is this. I feel like I'm a big old spider, and I sit in the middle of this web. And my job every day is to be feeling the web and feeling where the vibrations are. And if I feel a vibration that's big enough, my job is to move down the web to figure out what's going on, wherever it is that the disruption's occurring. But that is the cycle of work. Scarce resources and unlimited demands, active prioritization, set goals, measure, 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 and when you get off track, loop through again, correct, we go through the cycle again. Aspect number 4. So these first things I've talked about were sort of tactical. I mean, the first one was an idea. The second were sort of executional. About 15 or 16 years ago, I was trying to articulate this idea in my head that one of my strengths in managing was I tell stories. Tell stories all the time. And I never really could effectively communicate why or how. I just sort of knew it was the right thing to do. And I found this book. First off, in 1982, there was a McKinsey consultant named Tom Peters, and hopefully some of you have heard of Tom Peters, very famous management consultant. And he published an article called Management by Wandering Around. It was 1982, MBWA. He had this amazing insight that if you were leading an organization, you should actually go out and see what was happening in the organization. You all look stunned. I know I was stunned at the idea. But MBWA, Management by Wandering Around. So about 10 years later, this guy named David Armstrong published a book called Management by Storying Around. And I thought, okay, this is kind of a funny thing, but if you'll note, Tom Peters actually wrote the preface to it, so it's kind of cool. Anyways, telling stories. I was just reading a book. One of my favorite authors and speakers is a woman by the name of Brené Brown, and she just published a book called Braving the Wilderness. And in it she says, New worlds are important, but you just can't describe them. Give us the stories that make up the universe. Stories. And she said, she had a TED Talk in 2010 where she said, maybe stories are data with a soul. I thought, wow, that is pretty cool. I wish I'd said that myself. So I was thinking of an example of storytelling that might be effective to tell as a story to you this morning. And I thought of one occasion. Maybe it's 1995-ish or something, somewhere around there. And we had introduced mass email to our company. And we were a global company, so we had people emailing each other everywhere. And back then, I don't think we really understood the protocol or the rules about email. So I was visiting, well, to begin with, the story I'm about to tell you, I told at an all-hands management meeting to address disrespect in email, trying to establish protocols for how we should speak to each other. So I had the management team together and I said, I need to tell everybody here a story. I was in our Italian office and the general manager came to me and he gave me a piece of paper, which was an email, and he said, what do you think I should do about this email? And this email was written by a man who was as ornery and disrespectful as you can imagine. This email was awful. How could you have been so stupid, blah, 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 blah. And these two men had never met each other. So one guy from the home office emailing one guy out in the field, telling him he was not smart and should have done something totally different. So when I got back to the home office, I called in the guy who wrote the email and his manager, sat him across my desk, and I said, read this email. The guy picked it up and he started reading. I said, no, read it out loud. So he started reading. We got about halfway through it. Cheeks started to get a little red. You know, he wasn't very happy. His manager's eyes are getting big. He gets to the end of it, and I said, read it again. Now, second time through now, his hands are starting to shake. He reads through the whole thing a second time. He looks up at me, and I said, read it again. Third time through, he got halfway through, started to sob, couldn't get through it, put the paper down. And I said, we are never going to discuss this again. This issue is settled, but you understand my expectations here? Yes, finished. So I told this story to our entire management team. And I will tell you absolutely 100% that we changed the tonality of how we dealt with each other. A lot more integrity, a lot more personal respect. So that was very positive. And I think if I'd said, we're making a new rule, you have to respect each other, it wouldn't have worked. But I told that story and it changed people. And you know what the best part was? I made the whole thing up. Storytelling, very effective management tool. Aspect 5, serve your constituents. I've led both publicly held and privately held companies, but one of the things I understood very early was the necessity of identifying the key constituents that we served. I've heard management pundits say, if all you do is make your customers happy, you will thrive. I don't believe that. If you're technology driven and all you do is you innovate better than anybody, you will be successful. I don't believe that either. What I believe is that every organization has constituents that they serve. Your shareholders, your customers, your employees, your suppliers, and likely the community within which you live. And it is critical, from my perspective, if you're going to lead, that you identify your constituents, you identify what would be viewed as the satisficing level for each of them, and make sure that you reach that level of performance. C-section on scarce resources and unlimited demands. It's hard to optimize in every arena, but you have to recognize that you have to at least satisfy in every arena or you're going to struggle. Aspect 6, balance in all things. From a very young age as a manager, I began traveling. I have 4 children at home. We were raising kids, and I was on the road a lot. A lot of pressure and a lot of stress about just being an executive in a company. And what I learned was the flywheel effect. You know, if you got a big flywheel and you want to turn it, and it's big and heavy, and you grab that thing and you start moving it, and it takes all your energy to move it about 2 inches, and then you try a little bit harder and suddenly you move it a quarter turn, and then you're working like crazy and you get it all the way around one. You turn it and it doesn't take quite as much energy to turn it the second time, and by the time you get it the third time, it's starting to roll around, and then without too much effort, that flywheel's moving. My view of life is exactly the same way. If what you do with the aspects of your life is abandon one and focus only on another one for a long period of time, you got this flywheel problem with the first thing that you abandon. So way to say no, finding a way to say, I have to satisfy my personal life, my work life, my spiritual life, whatever it is critical. So from my perspective, the flywheel effect is very real in my life, and I urge you to think about balance in all things. I don't admire people who say, you know, I'm all in, type A, that's all I do, because I really don't think that's a balanced life, and I don't think that's healthy over the long run. C-section on scarce resources and unlimited demands. There's a theme through all of this, in case you hadn't noticed. I'm trying not to make it too blatant, okay? Recognize the difference between content and process. I think in many situations where we're dealing with struggles about trying to find answers, there are always elements of process and there's always element of content. And when we get the two confused and we get them all together, we can really struggle. I have always believed that if we create good process, we're likely to get good outcomes. If you get a good outcome from a bad process, that was an accident. That was luck. So as a leader, I have almost always focused on process. I've never thought I was the smartest person in the room with the best answer. But if we had a good process to get to an answer, then I was content, even if it wasn't the answer I necessarily would have chosen. So my focus on process has been a component of what I've done as a leader for now many, many years. And this idea about process and content, it all came out of this little book. I found it in 1976, Doyle and Strauss, How Meetings Work, and there's a chapter. Aspect 8, professional development. And I think I do recognize that I didn't take like the easy path here with this talk. I'm talking about things that are very personal to me and things I actually have never said in front of many people before. But this is one of the really interesting moments, again, in my career. I was a relatively young manager. I had a lot of responsibility, but I was prone to be angry. I was easily angered. I could be very caustic and very difficult to people. So the company I was with suggested that I work with a professional development person. So we sat down and we had sessions over 6 months, once a week, an hour or two every week for 6 months. And I hated every minute of it. I hated it. But in whatever year this was, 78 or 80 or 82, whatever year it was, he told me something that I have remembered every minute of my career since. He said, close your eyes for a second. He said, have you ever seen a movie about a naval battle? You know, with the tall ships and the cannons and oh yeah, I've seen those. Close your eyes for a second. He said, imagine the captain of the ship. What do you see during the battle? And he said, you know, there's the craziness and the running and the yelling. What's the captain doing? And I said, oh, the captain is striding the ship, hands behind his back, calm. And he said, why? And I said, because the moment the crew sees panic in the captain's eyes, the crew loses heart. And he said, precisely. So he said, from the minute you go out the door in the morning, for the rest of your career, carry yourself like a naval captain. That's me in my company uniform, so not really. Okay, thank you. You've been very patient. Listen to this sort of personal dialogue about my 40-year journey. Two parting thoughts that I would leave with you. The first, recognize that leadership times out. It's hard for us. When we achieve a position of importance or prominence, or where we get a lot of accolades for what we do, or we have power, or we have money, or whatever it is, whatever benefits you get from a leadership position, it's really hard to part with that. But the fact of the matter is that in most situations, those who lead have a shelf life of effectivity. And the organization you're with, whoever it is, deserves the opportunity to have the next great leader have their ideas and their approach. So in my view, leadership times out. And one of the hardest things to do is recognize that you're in that position of timing out. Because in the end, if you build something that's enduring and you build something that's great, all you are is a link in a chain that connects the past and the future. That's why you're there. So if you recognize that, and you have your own style, and you create your own effectivity, and you tell stories, and you recognize scarce resources and blah, 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 all that stuff, then I think perhaps you as well may have a successful career in leading whatever it is you're trying to lead. So again, I appreciate you all listening, and I really do hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you.